Gender, politics, cancel culture, trans rights. Few organisations have found themselves at the centre of those debates more lately than Stonewall. The Equalities charity is best known for helping to secure historic changes to the law in the name of gay rights and was championed for it. Today, though, its campaign, particularly on trans issues, is controversial. Internal splits have seen founding members walk away, questioning Stonewall's new direction and purpose. I'll be hearing from the chair of Stonewall, Iain Anderson, about what it's like being caught up in a culture war and ask if he thinks he's winning. Iain, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, it's been 10 years since same-sex marriage was legalised. Is that the greatest achievement of the gay rights movement and Stonewall, which you now chair?
So, I mean, this has been quite a joyous week in many ways. You're right, 10 years since equal marriage, long fought for. Stonewall right in the vanguard of arguing for equal marriage, and over 250,000 couples have been able to get married since. There's, I think, another 130,000 that are still in civil partnerships and maybe just very happy to be in exactly that status. But, you know, an amazing moment. But, no, what are you pointing to is, I think, maybe some of our politicians thought this was the high watermark, all they needed to do. Nothing more to do, nothing more to see. Well, you know, in so many ways, my concern is that we may have stalled in terms of LGBTQ progress. It certainly feels like that over the last 4 or 5 years.
I want to explore that a bit with you. So let's start off with Stonewall. Do you accept that many gay men and women who founded Stonewall, who supported it over the years, think the organisation's gone wrong, Iain? I mean, you say on your website that you stand for lesbian and gay people everywhere, but does that include gay and lesbian people that disagree with you on trans issues?
So, Stonewall took a decision to be trans-inclusive. I fully support that decision. It's taken that decision in a very, very thoughtful way. Now, why? Because we have equalities legislation that protects people and allows them and wants them to be able to thrive. Now, you know, there is discussion about this. You're absolutely right, but I do see, you know, as a man that grew up, as a gay man that grew up in the 1980s and early 90s, some of the language that's being used about trans people kind of rather reminds me of some of the language that was being used about people like me at that time. I'm calling for tolerance here. I'm calling for respect. I'm calling, as chair of Stonewall, to you know, allow people to be able to fulfil their lives and flourish.
And will you talk to those gay and lesbian people then, Iain, that think you've got it wrong? Do you have a conversation with them about it, why they think that you've got it wrong and you don't think you have?
Yeah, so I absolutely do. I talk to lots of people. Stonewall does talk to lots of people where there's a differing perspective.
But will you, for example, will you talk to the LGB Alliance?
So
will you talk to them? Because you've just said that you think we should have tolerance and discussion. Will you talk to them?
Yeah, so I am absolutely up for a conversation for those who wish to see all LGBT people make progress, right? I come back to this. Too much of this conversation is taking place on Twitter. So my challenge to the LGBT Alliance, my challenge to those that don't agree with me is there an opportunity, Beth, to work, to come together?
You have to talk to them.
And create. So here's my offer.
But you have to talk to them. I mean, you just said, I'll talk to people that basically are aligned with how I see it. And that's not going to...
I've said something slightly different to you today. What I'm saying to you today is Britain needs a strategy for trans people. It needs perhaps a look at where we are with our equalities legislation. There is a debate about that as to whether or not we're in the right place there. So that is what I'm saying to you today.
I want to just take a concrete example on this to help the viewer understand kind of where we're getting into is, you know, gay rights and trans rights and how they are the same but how they may be different, how some people see that different.
Yes.
Right? Do you think it's a sign of prejudice for a lesbian not to want a sexual relationship with a trans woman, given that being a lesbian is about being attracted to female bodies and most trans women have intact male bodies?
So I believe people should, in a tolerant society, be able to choose the partner that they want to choose. I'm certainly not suggesting, I'm not using words that would suggest that people are intolerant if they don't have that preference.
Okay, the reason I ask you is your CEO, Nancy Kelly, was asked this question about lesbians who don't wish to date trans women, many of whom will be, as I said, will have physically male bodies. And she said nobody should ever be pressurised into dating or pressurised into dating people they aren't attracted to, which is what you've essentially just said.
Yes.
But then she went on to say this, Iain, and I'm interested to see what you think of this. She said, but if you find that when dating you are writing off entire groups of people, like people of colour, fat people, disabled people or trans people, then it's worth considering how societal prejudice may have shaped your attraction. So, you know, I mean, what do you think about this? I mean, she's saying that lesbians who don't want to date trans women, many of whom, as we've talked about, might have male bodies, may feel that way because of societal prejudices that have shaped their attraction. What does that mean?
So those are not my words. You know, I come back to what I've just said to you. Everybody, I think, in this society has the opportunity to find the love and find the respect that you want. I think in some ways, a lot of that's been taken out of context.
But that, I mean, the reason I asked is she's your chief executive, and I've given you the full quote. I haven't taken it out of any context.
No, sure. I use my own words, Beth. I use my own words.
So you don't agree with her?
I use my own words. Yeah.
Yeah, because she was asked directly about this issue that I've just put to you, and that's what she said. You don't agree with her?
And I say everybody in a free society should be able to have the partnership that they wish and the loving relationship.
Do you think she was wrong to say that?
I think a lot of it's been taken out of context, as I say.
The reason I ask is that it's not out of context. I've given you the full quote, but can you see why some lesbian women will have heard that and think Stonewall is not for me anymore? Yeah. Like, that you're basically criticising me for not wanting a relationship with a trans woman. I'm a lesbian. Can you see why that...
No, I can see why people say that, and again, I'm saying to you that those are not my words.
You don't think she should have said it?
Those are not my words.
OK. Do you see why it's a problem for... Because it seems to me you set up Stonewall to protect gay and lesbian people and to further their rights.
Yes.
And then your CEO's saying something that if I was a lesbian woman, I might think she's trying to roll back my rights. Well, or she's criticising me in some way for not being attracted to trans women.
Indeed, what I was saying earlier is I think we've got to get to a place where we can have a respectful approach. We can have a real conversation. My offer is that rather than being in this wider feedback loop, we need to be able to think about a trans strategy for Britain. Because, look,
that's your CEO, and you don't agree with her, do you?
Well, if we go back...
You don't want to answer. I get it. You don't want to publicly disagree with her on it, but you clearly don't agree with that.
I use different words.
OK. All right, well, look, let's go on to women's rights, Iain, because many people... believe, and this is what you're talking about with the strategy, that trans rights are in opposition to women's rights, particularly when it comes to women-only spaces. This has been under a lot of public discussion.
Yeah.
Given the strength of feeling that many ordinary women have about these issues, do you take them seriously?
So I do. You know, we have legislation here in 2004, a Gender Recognition Act, which allows people to change their gender.
Yes.
As I remember, that wasn't a particularly controversial thing back in 2004. We then built on that, and we had an Equalities Act in 2010, which did a whole number of things, including creating safe spaces for women. In fact, this whole conversation has kind of come up again lately in terms of some of the Scottish legislation, in terms of a gender recognition certificate. Yeah.
Yes.
So we have established law in this country which does allow people to change gender, and we're not talking about, and the latest census data makes this point, we're not talking about millions of people. We're talking about 250,000 people that are trans.
Sorry, we do have special exemptions as well for women-only spaces, right, under the equality legislation.
Exactly that. So we, there are protections that are in place. Those protections were put in place for a very, very good reason.
Do you support those protections?
So I do support those protections, absolutely. Now, the question is, do we, and this is, I think, where some of the current conversation is, do we need to look at the legislation that's currently in place? Does it work? I think it does work. And actually, on your point about, I think, where most women are, there was some polling done last year to demonstrate, I think it's about, only about 4% of women that don't want to support trans rights. So, back to this point, an awful lot of this is kind of a bit megaphoned up at the minute. I think most people are very supportive of equality.
The question is about single-sex spaces where women can access women-only services. Do you support... I'm trying to get to whether you support that or not.
Yes. So that's within the Equalities Act. That's within the 2010 legislation.
And the reason I'm asking you, Iain, is because in 2015, Stonewall wrote to the Women and Equality Select Committee seeking a review of the Equality Act of 2010 to remove exemptions such as access to single-sex spaces. That was 8 years ago. Have you changed your position since then? Do you now want to maintain single-sex spaces for women in some exemptions?
So I think, Stonewall has always said that we build on the 2010 legislation. We've been having that debate lately through the debate on the Gender Recognition Act.
You did say in
Scotland.
2010 that you wanted to remove the exemptions.
So I think there's an overall case, I come back to this point, Beth, to look at a respectful and a tolerant approach towards trans people, and look at the competing rights and look at the competing responsibilities.
So do you back the exemptions or not?
So, I mean, the legislation that's there in 2010, I think we can build on. I think we can look again, and I think there's maybe a need for a conversation about that.
So when you said in 2015 to remove exemptions, you think that was the wrong... that Stonewall's position, then now you don't agree with that?
Well, I wasn't in the chair at that point, so...
So that isn't your position?
So, I mean, we've got established legislation, and let's see if we can build on it.
These exemptions in the Equality Act allow for women-only spaces. Now, for those purposes, Iain, does woman mean a biological woman only?
Right.
Or a transgender woman as well, under a gender recognition certificate that allows her to be treated as a woman under the law? That's kind of the nub of it, isn't it? What's your view?
So look, this is the sort of question that politicians are getting right now too, the sort of what's a woman question. Look, I think we all know what a woman is. I think, as I said as well, though, since 2004, for almost 20 years now, we've got legislation that allows someone legally to change their gender, right? So somebody can transition from male to female, from female to male. And they can...
And they could go in a woman-only space, in your view?
And they can, yes.
Right, OK.
Yes.
OK. So you don't think that women-only spaces should be in exemptions for biological women only? You think that transgender women who have reassigned as a woman should be allowed into those spaces?
But the Equalities Act, the 2010 legislation...
But they've got male bodies.
...does create the ability for institutions, whatever they are, to create the spaces that they want.
But Iain, to be clear, because this to me gets to the nub of the discussion here, which is you think that transgender women who have reassigned as women but might still have male bodies can be allowed into women-only spaces, be that a women domestic violence refuge, be that a female prison.
Well, I mean,
be that a female ward.
I think the practicality of what is happening is institution by institution, they're making these judgments. But we have legislation that allows people to change their gender. That's been, as I say, with us for 20 years.
But just so biological women, hear what you're saying. You're saying that you think transgender women should be allowed into women-only spaces, even if they have a male body?
I think that we've got legislation which allows people to make a transition. It absolutely does. And look, we're talking here about a very, very, very small number of people in society.
Yes.
What I want to do, what I want to try and get us to a place, Beth, is where we can actually, understand that there are some very, very sensitive issues here. There are people, people don't just suddenly wake up one morning and decide that they want to change from male to female or from female to male. And I just feel at the moment an awful lot of this conversation is getting very, very, very pumped up, very, very megaphoned, and we need tolerance in this conversation.
Because we're going to... this is a very live issue where the government are deciding about whether to change legislation to make it clear that it's biological women that are in women-only, that these exemptions apply to. So it's a very live issue, this. What do you say to women, biological women, listening to this, that just think why that they don't agree with, that they feel that they want to go to a women-only space and not have transgender women that might have male bodies in that what they would say is a safe space for biological women? What do you understand their concerns and what do you say to them?
I do, and I think there is there's more of a conversation to be had to try and to try and calm this, to try and provide reassurance. And I come back to this, that about, it's 96% of women in Britain, according to the latest polling, are very supportive of trans people, the last time that this was looked at.
But they also want women-only spaces. It doesn't mean that... You can want women-only spaces and be very supportive of trans people. They're not... It's not a zero-sum game.
No, it's not a zero-sum game. There are competing rights. There are competing kind of interest in this conversation. And what I would like to be able to do is get to a place where we could, I come back to this, have a strategy for this conversation.
And one thing, Iain, though, as well, is you want to make it easier as well for people to be able to reassign their gender. Is it still your position that you should be able to do that without a need for extensive counselling and consideration, as is the case at the moment?
Yes, so look, I mean, we've always argued that people need support. I mean, one of the issues right now is that folks can't get access to the health support and guidance that they need. I mean, there's a 4 or 5 year waiting list for people to be able to get that counselling, to be able to get that support. That's the kind of thing that we're arguing for. That's the kind of thing that we want to see. But no, look, I mean, as I say, I don't think people sort of wake up in the morning and decide that they want to make a change so fundamental in their life in that way.
Yeah.
People need support, they need counselling. And also, too, if we look at what goes on in other countries, if we look at what goes on in Canada, what goes on in New Zealand, what goes on in many states in the United States, the ability to get a gender recognition certificate is considerably simpler than it is in this country.
But you're saying that you want to make it easier, and you want people to be able to access gender recognition certificates more easily. But and you also say that in women-only spaces, trans women should be allowed into them. You're effectively going to make it easier for people to reassign their gender and have access to those spaces.
But these things are not easy to do. I mean, this is the point. They're not easy to do.
But polling suggests that 60% of the public, because you've talked about 60% of Britons versus 17%, 60% thinks the legal process to reassign gender should continue to require a doctor's approval. So the public from the polling, they're not with you on this. It's not that they have an issue. As you said, people are very supportive of trans people and trans rights, but they want a process in which this reassignment happens.
I think what people want is for people to be supported and for people to be able to be fulfilled in their lives. Okay. Look, we can't get away from the reality. So there's a biological reality, of course there is, but we can't get away from the reality that there are people who are born who are, not able to fulfil their lives in this way. And I want people to be able to be healthy and happy and fulfilled.
Yeah, and I don't think people disagree with that at all. I mean, as you said, people are very supportive of trans people. This is about also protecting other people's rights, and that's what we're talking about. Yes. I mean, let me look at another issue, if I may. I mean, because this is where we get into the nuts and bolts of all of this. I mean, should a woman, for example, who requires care at home, including intimate care, be able to request and receive care only from a biological woman, for example? Presumably you'd support that.
No, what I support is people being able to get care, back to our earlier kind of conversation as well about the partner that they want. They need to feel that they're getting care and support in the way that they want it.
So you think it would be OK for a woman to say, I need support at home, I need intimate care, maybe you need someone to undress you and wash you, and I want a biological woman to do that. That's OK for you? You think that's OK for people to be able to ask for that and get that?
Everybody needs to feel comfortable with the care and support that they receive.
OK, so that sounds like a yes to me.
Of course they do.
OK. Well, I want to come to another issue that, again, that has been, sometimes more heat than light, and that's the image of, sport.
Yes.
There's an image we've seen a lot of recently. I don't know if anyone can pull it up, but it's a podium with a trans woman coming first and a biological women coming second and third. Do you think that's fair, Iain?
So, sport by sport, people are looking at this. They absolutely are. I mean, we're about to celebrate this year 10 years of rainbow laces. That's one of the things that Stonewall has been right in the forefront of. So, look, I mean, grassroots sport, I'm absolutely delighted that more and more LGBT folks are getting involved and visibly getting involved. I think there's a huge problem still, for example, with the Premier League and men's sport. But on elite sport, what you're finding is sporting body by sporting body is looking at this issue.
I mean, put another way, how would you feel if you were number 2 and 3 in that scenario? Would you think that was fair?
Well, I'm absolutely rubbish at sport.
Don't dodge. You know what I mean.
Yeah.
How do you think this woman might feel about that?
Yeah, so, I mean, everybody... We're working our way through on this. This is how trans folk take part in elite sport is something that is very, very much...
This is a problem, isn't it? Do you see this as a problem?
I think it's a problem in terms of the perception of the conversation, but the way in which...
Don't you think it's a problem for these women? Well, in that competition, it's a problem for them, right?
The way in which this debate and the way in which science and medicine and the approach to this is developed is changing all the time, and each sporting body is looking at
this is a common sense comment. I mean, I think viewers looking at that would think, is that fair on these other women? I mean, do you think that you can see that that's a problem? No,
For me, I want everybody to be able to take part in sport. I want everybody to have role models that they can look up to and get excited by. That's why we do our rainbow.
But does this not make a mockery of competition in sport if biological women are having to compete against a transgender woman who might have a different physiology to them and a different... Does that not make a mockery of competition? How can they compete?
There's a whole bunch of things that are taking place right now.
It's a really basic question.
I understand the question you're asking. I understand the question you're asking. But are we to say that trans people shouldn't take part in elite sport? Are we to ban trans people from elite sport? If I can put it the other way around as well, Beth.
Well, that's a good question, and maybe transgender people compete against other transgender people. I mean, I think that's clear debate, but you can see there that
I think
that's hard for those women. I mean, how are they going to compete?
But I think we want everybody to be able to play their full part in society. We absolutely do, and that's where I'm coming.
You're talking about tolerance and inclusivity and not judging people or cancelling people because they are different, right? And different people have different views. You seem to be saying to me, and I think that you want a more open conversation. With that in mind, you'll have seen and heard some of the abusive language from the trans community towards people like J.K. Rowling and those that they call TERFs, trans exclusionary radical feminists, that's the acronym. Would you like to take this opportunity, then, to sort of send a message to those people to back off, to lower, as a leader in this space, to back off and lower the temperature so that it doesn't become this kind of battle in the way it has been, and quite abusive battle?
We need to lower the temperature on all sides of this. Wherever you sit on this, we need to lower the temperature. And that's why I've said to you today, I think, and I've called for, we need a strategy for this as opposed to megaphone diplomacy. That's what I really hope for. That's what I hope we can do in the months ahead. And maybe, through the election period ahead, this may feature through the election period. I want us all to have a respectful conversation, but the thing for me is I want my community to be able to fulfil the opportunities that are available to it. That's the thing that guides me in all of this.
Well, Iain, thank you. And I personally, it was great to have some space to actually go through the issues in a way that isn't a megaphone moment. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, plenty to think about from that conversation with Stonewall Chair Iain Anderson. Now, if you scan the QR code on the left of your screen, you'll be able to watch all of our previous episodes online. And if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to the Beth Rigby Interviews podcast. Each week, I take a look at the highlights of my interviews, and there's some extra bits and pieces in there too. That's on the Sky News app or wherever you get your podcasts. Well, that's all for this week and for this series. We're now off for summer recess. Thank you so much for watching and enjoy the sun.